My name is Frederick. I teach at the University of Iowa, and I teach an entire class there this semester on the initiative process. 16 weeks, 2.5 hours a week, talking about things like Miami grants and signature gathering and campaigns to pass initiatives and different requirements and such. And when I was invited to speak here, I was really excited. I told my students, like, I get to talk to this group of people that are really interested in the initiative process. What should I tell them? And I guess one of the things that we talked about, that I was asked to do here, is kind of summarize some of the academic research on this topic. And I'll say that I came to the initiative process because I went to graduate school in the state of California, and so I had a very interesting introduction to the initiative process. This was back during Proposition 5 and Proposition 227, some very big and controversial initiatives, which seems to happen a lot. And how I got interested in the process and what I was interested in working on was trying to understand what I call the broader effects of the initiative process. So if you look at the number of initiatives that appeared on the ballots in all the states over the last century or so, you'll see that on average there's actually only been about one initiative per state. And of those, about 40% of them pass. So some of you may be happy about that. It sounds like some of you might not be quite so happy about that. But so on average in each state that has the initiative process, you get about half of a new law per year, as opposed to 600-700 perhaps in the legislature. I think it's important to keep that in mind. A lot of the concerns about the initiative process I think that people put out there are based on things that happen on election day, right? Laws that people might not like, or campaigns that people might not like. But what I'm interested in is how having the initiative process in a state can change the entire political process. Not completely revolutionize it, but change it a lot. And so people who criticize the initiative process, the point that I want to make is that there's all these other things that change because of it. And so you need to take those into account when you decide whether or not you think it's necessarily a good thing or a bad thing. So I wrote a book as well as some articles and such, kind of summarizing these arguments. And I thought I would do hopefully a relatively brief summary of them today, since I just told you that I'm capable of standing in front of a class of students and lecturing for about 40 hours. You could guess that I'm certainly capable of going on for a while here, but I won't do that. So there are a couple of areas that people have looked at, these sort of broader or educative effects of the initiative process. One of my colleagues does work on this as well, and her work focuses on how the initiative process influences things like voter turnout on election day, how it leads to more educated citizens who know more about the political process, citizens who are more interested and engaged in politics. My work focuses more on the effect of the initiative process on interest groups and organized interests. Obviously there are groups that use the process, but there are also consequences for groups that might not use the process. Or groups that might not use the process today may have been involved in campaigns in the past. Based on some work that I've done, it turns out that about 33% of groups in states that have the initiative process will tell you that they've been involved with it. Most initiatives, even if you have money, don't even make it to the point of getting to the ballot. At best, like I think 25% in California actually make it to the ballot. And so there are a lot of groups that are interested in the initiatives, that are working on campaigns, and their initiatives might never actually see the light of day, or at least the light of election day. Perhaps as bright and shiny as that light might be. So one of the ways the initiative process is useful for groups who are interested in trying to make these kinds of changes, to try and change policies, is because it gives them a way to try and influence things that doesn't involve going through the legislature. And as many of you probably know, sometimes legislators or legislatures are not so receptive to groups trying to change laws that they feel that they've been involved with creating and passing and such. And so this gives these groups who might face a little bit of difficulty in the legislature another chance, right? Everybody here probably is familiar with that. But in particular, it turns out that the initiative process is particularly helpful for groups that don't necessarily have a lot of money, for groups that have a lot of members. One of the great questions that we study and that we're interested in is why it is that so many of the groups that we see lobbying state governments represent wealthy interest groups, businesses in particular. There are a lot of reasons for this. But it turns out the initiative process is one mechanism, one way through which you can help ameliorate this problem. Some of the work that I've done shows that states that have the initiative process have more groups involved in the political process, and in particular has more groups that have broad-based membership organizations. And so these in general don't tend to be wealthier economic groups, these tend to be groups that have open memberships that lots of people can join, that might be interested in issues like the environment or medical marijuana or things like that. Another effect that the initiative process leads to is that because you get these groups that are interested in these specific initiative campaigns, you get much greater turnover from year to year. And so you'll have groups that come in to lobby about a specific issue that may be on the ballot, that they may be trying to qualify for the ballot. Those groups may stick around for a couple of years. If the issue passes, of course, there could be a lot of conflict afterwards, trying to make sure that it's actually implemented properly, or that court cases are struck down, or turn out successfully for the group. And so you see a different dynamic in the political process, because not only do we have more of these groups, but the identity of these groups is changing faster from year to year. This has important consequences, I think, for the kinds of issues that end up not just on the ballot, but also getting discussed in the legislature, because these groups are not all of them are going to be interested in talking to the legislature, not all going to be just working on the initiative process, but they're going to be able to talk to the legislature as well. Legislatures obviously worry about initiatives, they're concerned about them, and sometimes, as many people said, the initiative can be done behind the door, which gives interest and opportunity to try and persuade legislators of the public support and the importance of their positions. Just to back some of this up a little bit, when I was doing my work, I did a survey of groups in states with the initiative process and states without the initiative process. And so the important comparison here, again, is not just between groups that are involved in initiatives, which is a fair number of groups, but just between the overall structure of groups in states with the initiative process. And again, what I found is that groups in initiative states, 24 states, tend to have more members, more just general people that join the groups. I'm actually doing some research right now that shows that people that live in states with the initiative process are more likely to join interest groups. So again, you see evidence of a more active and engaged citizenry, which is something certainly that the progressive founders who worked on and tried to push for the initiative process 100 years ago, and even a little bit beyond that, were very interested in trying to achieve. Because these groups have this different kind of structure, they have more members, and they often have not as great financial resources. This affects the other kinds of things, right? Obviously, these are useful things to have when you're trying to pass an initiative, because you need people to support you, you need people to help you do things like gather signatures, you need people to go out there and try and rally public opinion to vote for your initiative on election day. But when these groups aren't necessarily just working on initiatives, when they're trying to interact with the legislature, they still have all these members, right, that can be useful. And they can use these members to try and influence the legislature, try and talk to their representatives and to say, look, this is an issue, that this group that I belong to cares about. This is something that we'd like to see you work on. And so you see in general a greater pattern of grassroots lobbying in states with the initiative process. Greater reliance on like mail campaigns, letter writing campaigns, protests and demonstrations, getting involved with elections sort of on the ground, and less by doing things by going to committee hearings, less by doing things by going and just talking to legislators one-on-one. So you see, I think, a process that relies more on the opinion of the people and the resources of the people to try and get stuff done, even in the legislature. And again, this is even for groups that aren't necessarily involved with the initiative process. I wanted to add something that I thought would be kind of particularly interesting as I was catching up on some of the history and events in Oklahoma. Recently, I saw that there was an article in the newspaper that was titled "Bland as Toast." And this was a description of the ballot in Oklahoma. There seemed to be a concern that maybe a lot of the interesting issues that people wanted to vote on and decide and discuss weren't getting to the ballot in Oklahoma because of some of the restrictions that are put on qualifying initiatives in the state. And a lot of the things that I've talked about kind of rely on what I would call a healthy initiative process. You need a process that's actually of use and is reasonable and not too onerous for people to try and qualify their measures to get them on the ballot. For a lot of these things that I've talked about, people show up to vote on election day because there are initiatives on the ballot, and if there aren't initiatives on the ballot, then you're not going to see all these educative effects of the initiative process leading people to get more interested. And so one of the things about the regulations, trying to understand how these regulations affect whether or not you get actual measures on the ballot, or whether or not you have a ballot that is perhaps not so interesting, I found that some of the most